Tsugikuni family reunion. It was dark, not a sound was being made, until suddenly bright lights started flashing and moving around erratically. The lights soon stopped on two figures, one dressed in show host clothes and the other in their normal priest attire. Ara, welcome one and all to this new episode of Family Drama, said the female, showing herself to be Kocho Kanai. With me tonight is my assistant and hated enemy, Doma, she said, pointing towards the tall man in priest clothes. Moshi, welcome all. I hope you all will enjoy the drama here tonight, he said as a poisoned wisteria knife flew from the audience, impaling his left eye. Die, shouted out one Kocho Shinobu as she was being restrained by Tsuyuri Kanao and Kanzaki Aoi. Doma simply removed the knife like nothing was wrong. Already dead, remember Shinobu-chan? That's why we can finally host this long-awaited episode, Doma said cheerfully as there was mutterings in the audience. I don't care, Doma. Be quick about it. I have to go find Kokushibo. He's not here for some reason, said a man with long white hair and piercing crimson blood-red eyes. This was Kibutsuji Muzan, the former Demon King. Ara, patience Muzan-sama. Besides, Kokushibo Dono is here, just not as a part of the audience, Doma said as Muzan froze, eyes widening as he stuttered out. He's not part of the show. Is he? Kenai took over from there on. Why, how did you guess? Bring out the stars. As she said this, a door opened, and out first came Tsugikuni Akeno. She bowed politely to the cheering crowd as she sat down on one of the 5 futons. The next to come out of the door was Tsugikuni Haruhime, as she had beautiful straight black hair as she sat next to Akeno. Mother, she said in a soft, polite tone of voice. Daughter, Akeno replied in a soft voice with a small smile on her face. The next to come out of the door was Tsugikuni Uta, as she walked out with a happy smile on her face as she sat down beside Akeno. Hello, mother. Hello, Haruhime-chan, she said brightly as the 2 other women stayed at their daughter/sister-in-law before the next person came out. It was Tsugikuni Michikatsu. The crowd was silent except for Muzan yelling at Kokushibo, what are you doing up there? Wait, if you're here, then that means the next one is. Muzan paled at the implications as Michikatsu just ignored Muzan and saw that the only futons left were by Uta and Haruhime. He sat next to Haruhime. He didn't say anything and he had his eyes closed as Haruhime was glaring daggers at him. The final one to walk out of the door caused Muzan to have 7 heart attacks, Tsugikuni Yoriichi. Yoriichi saw Muzan glared at him, which caused Muzan to faint, and then walked over and sat next to his wife Uta. Kanai grinned as they had all of their guests now. Now that all of the star guests are here, it's time to play everyone's favorite game, Kanai said as she and the audience all said, Question spin. They all shouted as Michikatsu opened his eyes before looking towards Kanai and speaking. You told me that question spin was not the game that was going to be played tonight, so I agreed to come. You lied, he said as before he got up to leave, Yoriichi spoke. Brother, please stay, he said as Michikatsu looked towards Yoriichi's smiling face and sighed. All right, Kanai coughed. Now then, you all know the rules. When the wheel spins, it will land on a name of one of the star guests. That guest then has the chance to either ask a question or choose someone else to ask themselves a question. If their name is chosen again, then they cannot pick the same choice as they did last time, she finished as she turned towards the wheel. Now let's spin and see who goes first, she announced as Doma spun the wheel as it spun and spun before slowing down and landing on Michikatsu. She announced with some glee as Michikatsu sighed in despair. Damn it, he muttered as Haruhime glared at him smugly, and Yoriichi, Uta, and Akeno sent pitying looks towards Michikatsu. Now, Michikatsu, will you ask one of the others a question? Or will you have yourself answer one of the others' questions? Kanai asked as Michikatsu sighed again. I will have my mother ask me a question, he announces as the audience gasps as Kanai blinked. Got to say, I didn't see that coming, but no matter. Turning towards Akeno, Kanai asked, Now Akeno-san, what will you ask Michikatsu? Akeno stared at her eldest for several seconds before she asked, My son, why? Why did you abandon your own wife, your children? The entire place fell silent at this question. Michikatsu took several deep breaths as Haruhime glared mercilessly at her ex-husband. Michikatsu closed his eyes for several seconds before answering. I abandoned them because of my jealousy of Yoriichi. That was the main reason. The other reason was that I felt trapped. Haruhime blinked at her ex as even Yoriichi rose a brow at that. Michikatsu continued on, though. I felt trapped that while Haruhime's and I's marriage was arranged, we did love each other, but it still felt hollow because it was still an arranged marriage. He explained as Haruhime looked at him in slight shock as Akeno just sadly shook her head, while Uta and Yoriichi sadly smiled as they reflected on how lucky they were. Michikatsu wasn't done yet, though. She would have never been allowed to marry me without it being an arranged marriage. Too much stupid politics between bigoted clans for that, he said as Haruhime looked dumbfounded as Akeno snorted into her sleeve with Uta doing the same, and Yoriichi's smile twitching upwards at the words. Michikatsu, though, still barreled on. When our son was born, I was happy. Overjoyed, really. But I also quickly found out that my son and later on our daughter reminded me of my situation. Trapped. Michikatsu exhaled before he continued in a quiet and very soft tone. I wanted to be free. Free to travel wherever I wanted to and challenge strong opponents to grow my skills. If someone other than Yoriichi had saved me that night and offered me a place in the Demon Slayer Corps, I still would have accepted, but I would have left on better terms with my family, as I would not have any of my jealousy towards Yoriichi blinding me. He finished as the studio was filled only by silence before Haruhime spoke up. You would have still left us, even if it was not your brother who had saved you? You truly are a bastard, she said with a bitter and cold tone of voice as Michikatsu didn't reply, just sitting there in silence. All right, it's time to spin the wheel again. Doma? Kanai said as Doma spun the wheel once more as the name it landed on was Yoriichi, as Yoriichi barely even reacted other than a slight narrowing of his eyes. Now, Yoriichi, what's your choice? Ask or answer? Kanai asked as Yoriichi quickly answered. Ask. To who? Kanai specified. Brother, he said as Michikatsu muttered out a damn it, Yoriichi. As Yoriichi looked at his brother and asked, My brother, why? Why do you hate me? As Michikatsu took in a deep breath before answering, I don't hate you, Yoriichi, as the rest of the Tsugikuni family blinked. You don't? Yoriichi asked, puzzled. No, I never hated you, Yoriichi. I hated what you represented. Michikatsu clarified as Yoriichi tilted his head in even more puzzlement. What I represented, he asked as Michikatsu nodded. Yes, what you represented. You may not think of yourself as special, Yoriichi, but you are. You represented the concept of endless strength. What I desired most of all. You always desired to live a normal life, brother, but you never could. While I desired to live a life of strength, but never could. Michikatsu gave out a broken-sounding chuckle. Ironic. The strongest demon slayer could not complete any of his goals, while the strongest demon could not become anything or be anything other than the kami's greatest failure and disappointment. A hollow chuckle followed his words. Silence was all that encompassed the studio as Yoriichi tried to speak, but he couldn't. He tried to refute his older brother's words, but couldn't. It was true after all. Once his older brother landed in hell, the kamis told him that he was their greatest failure and disappointment. Did Yoriichi believe that? No, not one bit. Did his older brother believe it? Yes, he 100% did. Looking at his older brother, Yoriichi saw how Haruhime was staring death into his older brother. He sighed. Haruhime loved Michikatsu more than anything. It broke her when he abandoned her and their children. When the two met again, Yoriichi witnessed the confrontation. His older brother just listened as Haruhime raved at him about everything. When she was done and demanded that Michikatsu speak, all his older brother said was that the only thing he regretted was becoming a demon before walking away, leaving Haruhime to scream at him to come back and face her and their children. His older brother just kept on walking away. He was brought out of his thoughts as the next name was said, Akeno. Akeno simply gave a smile and declared, I will ask my eldest another question. All Michikatsu did was sigh and mutter, Is everyone going to only ask me a question? He was ignored as Akeno asked her question. My son, why were you jealous of your younger brother? Why couldn't you be happy with being you? Michikatsu stiffened as he looked to be biting back a very harsh response to the sensitive question. I was jealous at first because of his skill with the sword. Then it later included his ability to see into the transparent world. Then the fact that he may not have gotten everything, but he was still happy. Then when he saved me, I was jealous of his strength. During my time in the Corps, I grew jealous that everyone wanted to spar with Yoriichi and not me. I was also jealous that because of everyone wanting to spar with Yoriichi and not me, I didn't have any sparring partners most of the time, and the ones I did have would constantly complain about being paired with the lesser and weaker brother. This also had the consequence of me not being able to spar with Yoriichi at all. I only got to have in my entire time in the Demon Slayer Corps 3 spars with Yoriichi, while the rest of the other Hashira got to have up to 100. Michikatsu soon very quickly trailed off from the original question and started listing all of his grievances with the other Hashira. How in order to get his first spar with Yoriichi to improve his, at the time, still developing moon breathing. The Flame Hashira told him that he would either only get 1 spar with Yoriichi or none. He chose the first option. Then how he got his second spar with Yoriichi because he wanted to refine the first form's speed. The Wind Hashira demanded that he do his mission for him. If he didn't, he wouldn't be able to ever spar with Yoriichi again. He chose option 1 again. Then for his third and final spar with Yoriichi, the Thunder Hashira asked him to do something so disgusting that it had to be edited out of the footage. Though when cutting back into the footage, Yuta looked pale and seemed to want to throw up. Akeno had an aura of death and motherly rage around her and somehow pulled a sword from nowhere and was humming a very disturbing tune. Haruhime was in shock and even had a few tears trailing down her cheeks as Kane handed her a bucket, in which she promptly threw up in. As for Yoriichi, he had an aura of death, desire to murder, and younger twin brotherly rage at what had happened to Michikatsu. Akeno slowly stood up from her futon as she glanced at Michikatsu, on her face a creepy smile. My eldest son, do you know where those people are? She asked with such a false happy tone that even Shinobu in the audience shuddered at it. All Michikatsu did was say, audience 4th row. As he pointed to the terrified group of the first Hashira, as Akeno looked at them, come, my youngest son, let us deal with these things. She said without turning around as Yoriichi simply nodded as he stood up from his futon, and his glare was even worse than the glare he had reserved for Muzan. The first Thunder Hashira decided to open his mouth and say the worst possible thing ever. So you're his mother, can't wait to find out how good you are at, was all he could say as Michikatsu got up so fast and with such speed he had already unsheathed his blade and was right in front of the first Thunder Hashira. It looked like he had simply teleported. The first Thunder Hashira only screamed as Yoriichi too assisted his brother as their mother dealt with the other terrified first Hashira. Kanai and Doma simply looked onto the scene. Well, it seems that this brings an end to this episode of Family Drama. Stay tuned for the next one. Goodbye, everyone, Kane said as she and Doma bowed, as the first Hashira's screams and Haruhime's and Uta's cheering for their husbands resounded through the studio. The end.